Got my Prozac, I got my coffee. Let's do this shit. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today we are coming at you with a real hick classic today because we got some country and country folk records to talk about. We are going to be talking about the latest album from legendary singer songwriter Bill Callahan, his newest record, My Days of 58, as well as the latest project from formerly Sturgill Simpson, now under the name of course, Johnny Blue Skies, and The Dark Clouds this time around with the album Mutiny After Midnight. And let's start off talking about one Mr. Bill Callahan. And admittedly, I am not even the deepest Bill Callahan scholar that has appeared on this channel regularly. That would probably have to go to Riley, who actually introduced me to Bill Callahan some years ago under the name of Smog, which I believe is the name he's recorded under, where he kind of has the most pull in terms of critical and commercial success ever since the early 90s. He was kind of on this scene where there was just this kind of alternative country and alternative folk movement that built up slow momentum that didn't really have a lot of pull behind it just because nobody in the 90s was talking about country music like this. But, you know, if you knew, you knew. And that's how people kind of managed to build up a catalog, especially in the early 2000s, once the alternative music press really kind of caught on to albums like, for example, the 1999 classic record from Smog, Knock Knock, which is one of my favorite records out of this particular genre. Teenage Spaceship is probably one of my 20 favorite songs ever written, as a matter of fact. But Bill is a guy who has had this enormous catalog and has even been building up a solo career in the mid 2000s and has just kind of been on a ridiculously successful streak, critically anyway. He's never been the biggest commercial guy in the world, but My Days of 58 here is kind of the first really big record he's had since 2022. And even before then, I would wager to say that maybe 2013 was the last time he had a really, really big kind of written and talked about album. So I'd be willing to say there are more than a couple of people who were pretty excited, pretty stoked for this. And Bill Callahan's style is very interesting. He's a guy who, as he's gotten older, has leaned a little bit more into this very poetic, kind of talk singy delivery that is accented by these incredibly ornamental blues instrumentals. Damn right, progressive instrumentals in some instances, particularly on an album like this. But My Days of 58 here is kind of, as the title implies, Bill Callahan at age 58, taking a sort of approach where this album is a kind of reflective, not really a memoir per se, but just a meditation on where he is in his life right now. And I was interested in this, of course, but once it started getting really glowing reviews, I was like, okay, I'm really gonna like sit down for this. This is an hour-long record. I've loved Bill Callahan stuff in the past, but there have been instances where I've listened to some of his stuff, and the vocals can kind of come across as a little bit dry sometimes, and I know that that can be a bit of an obstacle for people. However, on this album, I think that Bill Callahan straddles the line between kind of his older smog-centric stuff and some of his talk singy stuff, and manages to blend it into a really accessible entry point into his discography if you've never listened to it before, but delivers these incredibly thoughtful, insanely witty, and very, very intelligently written songs that, I don't know, something about this album really spoke to me this week. And it has a lot to do with the fact that the instrumentals on this album are capital G gorgeous. Oh my God.
Absolute cosign.
These blues rock licks, these insanely like Baroque arrangements of woodwinds, of brass, of horns. They're fucking oboes on this goddamn thing. And it never feels like it's reaching beyond its grasp. It never feels as though it's kind of alienating you from the rootsiness of Bill's delivery. It is just, it's such a confident feeling statement that I was like, I'm so sold on at least one half of this album, and then the other half being Bill himself. And ultimately, man, I came to the conclusion that I knew he was a terrific songwriter before, but after this album, I think he's managed to single-handedly convince me that he might be one of the greatest living songwriters. And that's probably on me for not considering that beforehand. I have listened to some of his records in the past, but I really got to say, I kind of fell in love with this album. And Jen, I know you're a little bit less experienced with Bill Callahan, and that I'm pretty sure you aren't at all. So I at least
Yeah.
had the kind of precedent going into this of what to expect. How did this exactly play for you? Because I'll lead off with a kind of interesting spirit as I've listened to these two albums this week, and that is country music gonna end up being the dance music of last year? Like, is this gonna be the genre that comes out ahead? Because right now, looking at the albums that I've listened to this year, country and folk music is it's putting in work. It's putting in a lot of work.
So, all right. Yeah, let's get to talking about this. So, I think with My Days of 58, I've found a really perfect introduction to Bill Callahan's discography because it really felt like a great introduction to his artistry, sitting through Why Do Men Sing for the first time and getting this
Yes.
really minimalist and really straightforward lyrical and acoustic presentation that just as you go through this 7-minute track blooms into this full arrangement of blues rock greatness with all of these wonderful vocal harmonies. And when the layers really kick in at the midpoint of the track with these adding of guitar and drums, the song really feels like it comes to life. And this being my first time listening to Callahan, it really felt like his scale as a performer was being given this really delicate introduction that felt very inviting as a
Yeah.
first time listener of his stuff. And really, this whole album feels like Callahan looking back at a lot of his youth and a lot of the growing that he's done as an artist and as a man, and is attempting not just to hand down wisdom to the listener, but to identify where he still has room to grow as a person a lot of the time on this record, which I found really, really inviting as a first time listener to really sit with and figure out and explore because I loved the exploration of this kind of need to wander on the midpoint of this album, West Texas,
Hmm.
where, and on Highway Born, where he talks about, this need to continue exploring the world and this need to continue kind of being in motion and not settling for too long at one place at a time. It kind of reminded me of the troubadour spirit that Miranda Lambert talked about on The Weight of These Wings, which
If
we
you didn't say
talked
it, I
about
was
not too
gonna.
long ago. But I really found this kind of contentment with a midlife crisis to be a theme that recurs through a lot of this album, where often Callahan just as much is able to accept his weaknesses and his flaws, and just as often he is able to kind of restate his virtues as a person and as a songwriter and as a really thoughtful individual, which I really, really loved. And he's able to, pat himself on the back in a lot of respects with the life that he's earned for himself, the love of his children and of his wife, the success in his artistry, and the satisfaction and the efficacy of his artistry, which is something that I found really, really interesting. Because, like, on the song Computer, you get all of
Yes.
this in this kind of perfect cycle where you get all the flaws and all of the successes of Callahan as an individual rendered in this one piece of music that just explores this relationship with technology and what him being reluctant to accept some of the more modern ways of doing things says about him as a person, what he can get away from, what he struggles with accepting, and what he ultimately refuses to accept in a way that he kind of stakes this grand claim and this grand desire to continue being a certain type of person, a certain type of artist. Of like, I don't know, when he gets into talking about auto-tune toward the last leg of the track, it gets to a point where he could really start to lose me, but I ultimately really understand the sentiment of what he's going for, which is that like this doesn't feel like me. Like I don't understand the lack of the human soul that comes from a lot of auto-tune practices and AI and computer generated music. And I'm like, there's definitely a part of that narrative where if you zoom out far enough, you're gonna get to old man yells at cloud territory. But
Yes.
with this, I really do think he rides that line perfectly between being a little bit out of touch
Mhm.
and being able to establish that, like, no, this wouldn't make my art meaningful if I felt like I had to do all of these things that I feel like have become trends in the music industry as of late, which I just found really, really, really intriguing. So I think for me, this album is about a character portrait of Bill Callahan, which I thought was really, really great and really, really interesting to explore. I love the soundscape of this album. There's a lot of rich textures on this, a
Oh
lot of
God,
great
yeah.
lyrical platitudes. Like I loved on Pathal OG, the whole
Oh,
sentiment
what a
of
song.
don't treat your lifeboat like a yacht
Oh
is
man. That's
huh.
that's one of the lyrics of the year so far for me. I was just like, I heard that and was instantly like, oh, that's those are literal words to live by. 100%.
I loved it. I adored this track. And I felt similarly about The Man I'm Supposed to Be, where
Yes.
he's talking about kind of coming to this place where he realizes that, like, I can't give up on the idea that I can continue developing as an individual. I cannot give up on the idea that I am in flux. I cannot submit to stagnation. I love that sentiment. Whenever an artist is able to really put that kind of thing forward, it ends up being a thing that I really respect. The idea of refusing to remain static is just wonderful. And as somebody who, puts some of that creative spirit back into what we're doing right here, yeah, it feels really rejuvenating to see, right? Where
Yeah.
refusing to become stagnant is the thing that I'm trying to like wrestle with myself right now with a lot of creative endeavors that I've been doing. And so hearing Callahan, a man a generation above me, like he's only a couple years older than my dad,
Yeah,
which
same.
disturbed and frightened and gave me many thoughts throughout this record. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm thinking about my own father when listening to this album in a couple of places, and I'm just like, man, what might have been.
I completely get what you mean. And, there's a lot of really interesting content on here, especially in like the first three songs in particular, where you see Bill Callahan reckoning with a kind of masculinity that he does not relate to, where he is talking about these things of what is expected of a man, what is supposed to be, what we build up in our minds to be the image of a man, and how, like, Bill is clearly this guy who's this classic sort of old school singer-songwriter. Like he's got that line about autotune on computer. And I felt exactly the same way as you, where I was just like, I've been hearing people say this about autotune for a long time, and I kind of thought it was bullshit then, and I kind of think it's bullshit now. But then, you really put it in the context of the song. I don't think Bill Callahan is unaware of the fact that he sounds a little bit like an old man yelling at a cloud. I think that that's very much
Yeah,
built into the DNA of what this is. And kind of talking about it, it kind of makes you pull back a little bit and be like, yeah, a guy who makes an album that sounds like this is probably not going to think too fondly of autotune. And you know what? I kind of get it. Like, there is an understandable degree to which I get this. And even then, when he kind of makes the delineation between like what he thinks that autotune does and like AI and all of that stuff, it's really more like he's not complaining about, T-Pain and Charlie XCX. He's complaining about, top 40 radio hits that are just using autotune to do it because that's what the trend is and not because the music calls for it. It's this thing that is applied en masse without really trying to understand what effect it actually has on the music. And frankly, I do kind of sympathize with that a little bit as somebody who's been hearing, like, yeah, I don't really care if autotune is in something. I care if it's used well. But there's so many people, especially in the country music scene, Morgan Wallen, who
I
do
was
not
about to
need
go there if you
who
weren't.
do not need this shit at all and actively make their music worse because of it for no reason. So there is a level on which I'm like, I understand this. And maybe that's just my fucking old ass soul talking, but there is so many moments on here that I found both refreshing, full of clarity, and also just like really funny. I think as a songwriter, the person I thought about the most often while listening to this was actually John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats, just because they have a very similar sense of humor. They employ irony in very similar ways, and they're both very clever in similar ways, in ways that don't immediately leap out of you, but certain stanzas will just kind of go together. Like, I mean, think about the fact that we have a song on here at all called Pathol OG, which is just like, wait, Oh, I get what you're doing here. Like, he's a guy
Yeah.
who really likes to play with the linguistics of his words. Like, he's a
Oh,
writer.
maybe my favorite moment of this on the record is at the end of Pathology when he's talking about Jacob's ladder and it
Yes.
gets on this refrain of lay that ladder down and get across,
Yes.
which is
God,
like,
yes.
carry the cross and get
Across a
across.
cross. Yes, it's such a brilliant little moment of writing. And honestly, the album is full of moments like that. And there's very vulnerable moments. I mean, like Why Do Men Sing is such a great statement of purpose for this album, and sort of he really kind of dresses himself down and deconstructs himself in this song and kind of just lays it all out there, and it kind of feels like that the album just sort of works its way up from there. Especially with The Man I'm Supposed to Be in Pathology, which is just like, this is such an immaculate sequencing of songs from a thematic standpoint. Like, I feel like this is the strongest part of the album to me, is that it just gets off on such a strong foot and it doesn't drop off. I think this album is consistently incredibly fucking solid. Like, a great record when all is said and done. But the moments on here that leap out to me are the ones where he pulls back a little bit from maybe talking about songwriting and performing and stuff, which I do find very compelling. But when he talks about himself on a bit more of a personal and revealing level, like, again, you mentioned the song Computer, which is very much a song about how human beings were not meant to see the things that we are seeing on a daily basis. And he's just kind of like, I don't really know how to deal with this, and I don't really know how anyone else is either. And, as someone who has just become more and more increasingly aware of the algorithmic panopticon that we all live inside, it spoke to me on some level. What can I say? But there is also a way to balance it out. Like, this is an album that I would describe as it's reflective and even self-critical, but it is also very optimistic. There's nothing in here that feels like defeatist. There's always a sense that Bill is going uphill thematically and is able to conquer what he is encountering. Like, there's the song Empathy, where he talks about basically, I mean, just generational, like, parenting, and how, like, his father's lessons, or even sometimes lack thereof, informed him as a human being, and how that relationship sort of informed how he treats his kids, and how like, being a father, he describes it so interestingly as being like kind of a fluid state in between the generations on either side of you, where you're like constantly disseminating information from both of them in order to make yourself a more like grounded person, but also a more empathetic one. Like, he's talking about his son who is like teaching him empathy. And I'm like, that's like such a deeply refreshing thing to hear. Like, not even in the sense that, like, oh, an old
Yes.
guy is talking about not being an asshole or whatever. It's more or less that he's just like, no, I can learn from another generation that I don't like necessarily completely relate to, because they were born into this world and understand it on a level that I can't, because it wasn't the same one I was raised in. But he also has to balance that with the advice and the grounded nature of how his father raised him. And he kind of meets them both in the middle. And I found that to be such an interesting way to tackle this topic. And aside from that, I think what this album does is that it just provides you with such clarity. It's not really too far away from the Emily Scott Robinson album that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, in how it really feels like there is just an appreciation for the world around you. I think one of my favorite moments on the record, maybe even my favorite, is just Stepping Out for Air, which is a song that is literally about just going outside and feeling the world and understanding that, like, just kind of getting away from the noise and appreciating the simple pleasures. And the way he puts it, it's so like, you're listening to it and I'm immediately like, I need to get out of my car and go for a walk. I just want to like hang out. I just want to feel the world for a little bit. And it's nice. It's an album that grounds you in reality and kind of safely reminds you of its dangers, but how those dangers are not necessarily conquerable, but easily navigable, especially when you're someone with his level of life experience and somebody with his kind of wisdom. In that, I think the sort of conceit of the album at the end of the day ends up being that the wisest thing you can do is admit that you don't know everything. And that's Bill Callahan to me. On this record, he is a man who his wisdom comes from the fact that he doesn't have all the answers. He's never going to have all the answers. Nobody is. And if we pretend otherwise, we're probably experiencing a bit of a delusion of grandeur. So this was a really lovely surprise. Not that I expected anything less than great from Bill at this point, but I think the real just sort of thing that puts this a leg above even some of the albums I've listened to from him is the recording on this thing is fucking insane. Like
This
the
album
crispness.
sounds gorgeous.
Oh, it is a treat. If this was released and it was just these instrumentals, I would be coming onto this show telling you you still needed to listen to it because it is just, it's so rich, it's so warm, it's so beautiful. Like, if you're gonna have a line on here where you decry auto-tune, you better be doing this really good analog production as well as you're doing. And there are some like electronic flourishes on here that do work, like on computer. There's kind of these fizzly kind of weird synth tones that are just kind of bubbling around the mix at certain points. And like it's applications of things like that that make you just go, yeah, you know what? This guy really does know what he's doing. And yeah, I was able to go along for the ride. This was an album that's, it's a little bit north of an hour, and Bill's songwriting pace is not exactly lightning fast, but I didn't mind having to listen to this multiple times at all. Like it really earns its length. Like the only moment on here that I think is maybe a degree of separation away from everything else is the song And Dreamland, the penultimate track, which I understand like the point of. It's very much in keeping with the reflective and appreciative of the world around you kind of parts of the record. But the obtuseness and kind of vagueness of the lyricism on here does kind of obscure where this song kind of ebbs and flows in a way that like I just didn't have the level of clarity that I did on other songs that I did on here. But even then, it sounds incredible. A perfect treat for the ears. I highly recommend this, and if you get anything out of it, go listen to the Smog album Knock Knock. It's a little bit more melodic. He's kind of like singing a little bit more, and you're gonna hear some of the best songs ever written. So yeah, this is a enthusiastic recommend from yours truly.
Yep, same here. I loved this Bill Callahan record. Excited to go back into the backlog and learn more about this guy's music because this was a great introduction to his artistry. So, big thumbs up from me as well.
Hell yeah, absolutely. And now, I've been waiting so long for this. Now we are talking about Sturgill Simpson, technically Johnny Blue Skies, because Sturgill Simpson is one of the voices in country music right now. I would say that in terms of the alternative country slash outlaw country kind of space, Sturgill is the guy. I would say that maybe there's only three or four more credible voices in that world today, right now. I mean, it's like Sturgill's up there with Jason Isbell, with Chris Stapleton, with like the guys who get commercial movement, but also are huge critical darlings. And I have been a huge fan of Sturgill ever since I first listened to him, which was with his album Meta Modern Sounds in Country Music a long time ago. And, ever since then, he's kind of like, he's had this thing where he's not just an alternative country artist. He's got this crazy psychedelic kind of, I think it's more colloquially called now, cosmic country sound, where he's blending psych rock and alt country and outlaw country together to make these beautiful psychedelic soundscapes that soundtrack his more traditional outlaw country sentiments. And this sound has been carried forward from 2014 onward. In 2016, he dropped the album A Sailor's Guide to Earth, which is one of my favorite albums of this entire decade, and like probably like one of my four favorite album covers ever. If you haven't heard that album, by the way, please go check that out. Dude covers Nirvana on this album. The entire record is this concept album about sort of making a life story to pass on to your child and like relay your adventures, your seafaring adventures to your child. And it is just this deeply affirming, gorgeous sounding album that just propelled him into further and further success. 2019 Sound and Fury was this crazy psychedelic kind of dance country record that was accompanied by like this visual project that I believe was dropped on Netflix, but was just this
Yeah, it
crazy.
was by Anime Studio, the guys that did the Batman Ninja movies.
Yes, that's right. I think that was Production IG, if I remember correctly, which is the studio behind Ghost in the Shell. Fun fact. But that entire project was super weird, and it was very much an album about the boiling anxieties of, well, being a guy of Sturgill's persuasion in the midst of the political climate of 2019, which was bad. And so that also got him a lot of attention, a lot of eyes on him. And he actually got a huge groundswell in 2020 with his dual releases of Cuttin' Grass Volume 1 and Cuttin' Grass Volume 2, which were standards and old songs of his that he covered in a traditional bluegrass music kind of way that he released for like either it was either for free or at a hugely discounted price during the pandemic. And like people just they couldn't get enough of this shit. Like I saw people I had never seen post anything about country music. Like maybe they listened to Tyler Childers, like maybe. And then they were suddenly talking about this. And he even had a couple of songs on there that like did well. But in 2021, he capped off his what we considered to be his kind of solo career with the album The Ballad of Dude and Juanita, which is this really brief kind of concept narrative album that's this very traditional sort of thing that, if I'm being really honest, I like that album and think it has a lot of really neat songs on it, but it is very much a I did this to get out of my record contract kind of record. And then he moved on to being Johnny Blue Skies, which in 2024, I did not get to say this because this episode got lost in the shuffle somewhere, but Passage du Désir, his debut album under this name, was my album of the year. A bona fide 10 out of 10 absolute fucking masterpiece of a record. It combines everything I loved about Sturgill's music in the past with this unreal sonic palette that just like even for him was a level of instrumental proficiency and just like baroque arrangements that I was like, I didn't know that this dude had this in him. So naturally, I have been awaiting what he's going to do next with bated breath because he's a guy who has no limits. If Sturgill wants to do something, nobody is going to stop him. And that's kind of why I love him so much. He's one of my favorite working artists for a reason, and that he's completely unafraid to take risks, but he's also so confident that that riskiness has never blown up in his face, never once. And it's almost like his goal with this project was to test the limits of what I just said,
So
because
let me tell you about my first experience with this
please,
project.
please do.
So we had been talking about doing this album already.
Hmm.
I think before either of us realized that this album would not be coming out on any streaming platforms, not even on YouTube. It was just going to be a physical release. It was all going to be CDs and tapes, and they
Hmm.
were going to ship out very, very soon.
Hmm.
Now, the week that we decided to do this, I went to shout out to Guest Room Records here in Louisville, Kentucky. Went to Guest Room Records asking about this album and had a very nice conversation about how the label has apparently completely fucked this whole thing.
No.
Several, like probably two-thirds of the copies got recalled because I don't know. Something must have gone wrong with the pressing or the packaging, or something has gone horribly wrong with this record. So even fewer people have heard it than were initially going to, because copies that should have been sold, that sold out at the both of the locations in my city that I knew where to get a copy of the thing, sold out immediately, and then a bunch of the rest of the copies that were supposed to show up just never showed up. And so what should have been a great moment for, physical media, especially Sturgill Simpson is a Kentucky native, what should have been a great moment to uplift like record stores and places like that here in the
Yes.
state, just turned into a complete dumpster fire. And so I hate to see that. I really hope that, I don't know, maybe they run it back and this album gets a more traditional release because I initially was even thinking about protesting you and just being like, no, can we talk about something that people are actually gonna be able to listen to without having to go digging around for it? But eventually, after listening to the album a couple times, I'm content with giving this my attention in the slot for this week because I really do think that what Johnny Blue Skies is doing here is really important to talk about and could have been a big game changer had the release not gone to complete hell. But let's talk about what we do have, which is a funk rock cosmic country record that takes more of what Sturgill was doing on Sound and Fury and Sailor's Guide to Earth and brings it over into the Johnny Blue Skies moniker. But what did you expect after Passage to Desire? Because I did not listen to that album when it initially came out. I only caught up with it recently, which I found out I really, really loved it. But I guess what were you expecting from this new Johnny Blue Skies and the Dark Clouds moniker and what seemed to be a slight pivot for the project?
Well, I didn't really know what to expect just because Passage de Desir is just this like it feels like a finale. Like it feels like something that is being built to because it's this unbelievably gorgeous sounding record and it also showcases some of his most ambitious and interesting songwriting, which is I mean no small feat considering I think he is a terrific songwriter. It may be my like favorite thing about him as an artist. But I was just kind of like, this is clearly something that has no limitations. Like, this is not limiting itself in any way. He could feasibly do anything or go anywhere. And considering from the jump, he has been such an innovator. He's been like a guy who's been completely unafraid to delve into this sound that, I mean, let's face it, is kind of for alternative music weirdos. It's very much a critically oriented thing. This is not something that is going to get enormous commercial pull. But the first thing I like the way I even found out this album was happening in the first place is that I'm on Stephen Hyden's mailing list and he had written an article some weeks ago and billed this album as some kind of like basically a funk rock dance protest album. And I read that and I was just like, Sturgill Simpson's fucking what? And then I see like the album cover of this, and then I see like the descriptors on Rate Your Music, and then I track it down. And for the record, I know that Sturgill is also very upset about this entire hubbub and the fact that the album leaked at all. Don't worry, man. I buy all your shit on vinyl, and I'm trying to promote your music so that more people listen to it. So sorry that happened, man. I really hate that this is happening to a Kentucky native, especially a guy who last year, in the middle of the awful, awful floods we were having, did an insanely awesome show at Rupp Arena where he played for 2 extra hours in the middle of a torrential rainstorm and was just absolutely fucking demolishing the guitar on that. It was one of the coolest things I've ever fucking seen, and he raised money to help people who were affected by the flood.
Awesome.
Thank God, that is so cool. And so, thankfully, I can at the very least come into this and tell you all definitively, not only do I think this album is a completely worthy follow-up to its predecessor, which, that's always the worry is that when you get an album of the year and then somebody has to follow it up, you're like, oh, is this going to live up to the expectations? Is it going to be more of the same? Is it going to innovate? And this is kind of an ideal sort of follow-up because it's taking a lot of elements that were from the previous record and it's doing something completely different with them. The attitude, the tone, miles apart from the first record. And again, considering how wide the sonic range of that album was, I think this is a brilliant move on his part. But it's only a brilliant move if you can pull it off. And frankly, I can't believe I'm saying this, but guys, Sturgill Simpson made a better dance album than Harry Styles did. That's a real thing I just said and meant in the year of our Lord 2026. We've got this album here, which is this disco funk, like Jen said. This album indebts itself not only to sort of Merle to Sturgill's forefathers of outlaw country, like people like Merle Haggard, for instance, people like Hank Williams Jr., and then blends it with 80s Bowie and fucking 80s and 90s Prince. And I'm like, okay, this sounds utterly unhinged. This sounds insane. And not to mention, the entire album is taking a page out of the Sound and Fury playbook and is very political, very contemporary. So it is insanely easy to see how this album is just a car crash. You can just you list all of these things. You see the fact that the opening track is literally called "Make America Fuck Again." And I mean, in true Prince fashion, he spells fuck wrong, which made me like that let me know I was like, okay, somebody's paying pretty close attention here, but like what are we actually going to be doing here? And honestly, Prince is sort of the name of the game here, both in tone, in instrumental versatility. Like, this is Sturgill Simpson making the alt country 1999. This is an apocalyptic dance record. It is a dance record that says, everything fucking sucks. What else is there to do but to
You
dance
know what I
about?
was thinking about while listening to this record a whole lot?
What?
Struggler, the Genesis Owusu album. I feel like they've made very similar progressions here because you've got, okay, so the first
Huh.
Genesis Owusu record, right?
Yeah.
All this sonic variety, all these big leaps and bounds in songwriting, and then Struggler is where he streamlines a lot of those tendencies into a more straightforward, fun, funky concepts,
Hmm.
apocalyptic dance record because Owusu has all the like going through hell, spiritual journey stuff. This has the political collapse narrative running through a lot of it. And so I feel these albums coming from pretty similar points of tension, but deciding that the solution to resolving that tension is to make a fun dance record about letting off some of that steam in the most happy and optimistic ways possible, even when you're directly holding up a middle finger to the system. You're gonna have a good time grooving out while doing it, like on the song Excited Delirium, which is a funk track that sounds like it's about being on a bad drug trip, but is actually about living in a police state.
Exactly. I mean, like, it's kind of one in the same, and how it's just like, yeah, being in a police state does feel like a drug trip because none of this shit feels like it makes any goddamn sense. And that's kind of Sturgill's position, is that, like, this is unmistakably a political album, but it is a lot of its content is a little bit on the understood side. And frankly, for a dance album, I think that's a much smarter approach. Like, I don't necessarily think that it's like impossible or even a bad idea to make something that, deals in the political polemics and really actually starts to talk about things like, the the most recent LCD Sound System album kind of sort of did exactly that in a lot of ways. But I think that you have to prioritize the kind of primal urgency of dance. So you can't really, if you want to have your priorities in order, I feel like you can't necessarily spend all of your time trying to dig into, oh, I feel this way about these things and trying to unpack these issues. Like, leave that to Jason Isbell on his most recent record. Leave that to, like somebody whose goal is not make a fun protest record. And on here, I still do think the political ideas are interesting and engaging. Like, Make America Fuck Again is such an interesting song because it's this, like, embrace of a kind of hedonism, but it's hedonism that's, like, bizarrely kind of reined in. And you can tell that it's like, this is the hedonism we are allowed to experience in, well, I mean, the police state. And so it feels like a little bizarrely held back, but in a way that I do think works. It's like being on the dance floor while a bunch of armed men are watching you, waiting for you to make the wrong move. And it plateaus
Ugh.
in an interesting way. I love the way that the guitar sound on here, like the entire, like the band sound of this, it's so good. Like, if you're going for Prince, which he very clearly is, you need to have versatility. You need to have interesting arrangements. You need to have the band needs to be here and they need to be present. And they very, very much are. And when you have like Make America Fuck Again is actually one of the more not stayed, but it's like it's a song that kind of it plateaus early in order to I didn't really understand the structural choices of this song at first, but then once I considered the fact that it's just kind of a steady lead in to an album that just is focused way more on building momentum and then tension releasing. And I was like, oh, on like a structural album level, not necessarily a song level, now I understand this because Excited Delirium is that's where it picks up. That's where it starts going. And then you move into Don't Let Go, which is kind of the tension dispersal and probably my favorite song on the album because it is kind of the most traditional sort of Sturgill laying into his strength song on here, and it's like one of the more emotional like ballads too that he's ever written, but like the production's absolutely gorgeous, and it's sort of message of just, like perseverance and valuing the people around you. Like it's desperate in a way that I feel like is very understated, in a way that I feel like is urgent, even though the music doesn't sound that way. But all of the songs here have this depth to them where they intentionally kind of wrong foot you with maybe their tempo or the way that they sound or the way that they're arranged and what Sturgill is actually talking about. Like Excited Delirium is one of the few moments where the kind of topic and energy match each other and you're on the wavelength. And then other places the album kind of disorients you. Like Viridescent in the middle of this is this beautiful psychedelic dance song that's just like I mean, it made me want to like get high. I like that's the best way I can put this is that a bunch of songs on this album are feel like they're perfectly engineered for you to just to get into this slow kind of woozy, wavy thing, but like they never the production's never thin. It's never using that as an excuse to just kind of be like, oh, we're just gonna noodle a bit on here. Everything is so muscular. And I mean, there are moments on here too where I do think that the writing goes beyond just like the simple, like, fight the power, kind of like, resist all that kind of stuff, which can come across as sort of sloganeering in the wrong hands, but I don't ever think really is the case on here. But I have to say, it's really fucking refreshing. Really refreshing. Even it's from a guy who I know has his politics in order in a way that I understand and relate to, is that it's really, really nice to hear a prominent voice in the country music scene have a song like Everyone is Welcome, where he explicitly, no holds barred, is literally like, gay rights, trans rights, love immigrants, creed, color, I don't give a fuck. Let's all just dance and have a good time. This is a place where everyone is welcome. And it's the moment where I feel like it most effectively crystallizes the album's point, where it's just like, it's a bit broad, but it's also just like unity, man. Like, just you have to
I
be together, you have to have fun. This song was like, oh, this is like it kind of feels like maybe Sturgill Simpson was like, I'm gonna do me a white boy sinners the kind of thing here where
to
everybody's
to
gonna.
take the piss on this a little bit, it's very funny that two times in this week of music we've had Kentucky white boys claiming proximity to black people, and Sturgill Simpson is the one that I'm respecting more.
Oh, unmistakably, like Sturgill Simpson, I
If
actually.
there's no black people on the ship, I ain't going is a little, it's much in a kind
Yeah,
of good way.
look, if you like, if there is any opportunity to do too much, this is it. You need to
Yeah.
be indulgent. You have to lay it all out there because, again, that's what the music of Prince is all about. It's about being indulgent, it's about flavor, it's about style. And man, this album's got flavor and style. And frankly, I think this is as solidly built as anything Sturgill's ever made. I think it really holds together as a really fun album and a really interesting and bold, frankly, experiment. And I love every song on here. I'm not going to lie. The only real complaint that I have is that there's so much happening in all of these songs. Like they are a cavalcade of glorious production choices. That being said, there are moments where even on songs that I really love, where Sturgill kind of he'll have a bit one too many effects on his voice. And I feel like in order to more effectively anchor yourself into these songs, you need something that has a little bit more weight in some of these mixes because everything, again, it's so like loud and some of these songs are so like ephemeral in how they're constructed that sometimes his voice fades into the background in a way that I don't think is completely conducive. But like that's only when I like sift through like some of these. Like for what this is, not only is it a successful experiment, it's also just a fantastic proof of concept that Sturgill Simpson can just he can do whatever the fuck he wants, and he's so good at it. Like, he understands what makes funk rock fun, he understands what makes protest music fun, and this is still unmistakably an alt country album. Like, at the end of the day, that's the primary genre. I think that this is no less than like this is it really shows you at the end of the day that country music can still be taken in so many new and interesting and exciting directions if you give it into the hands of people who want to take it to bold places. And I mean, God, thank God people like Sturgill are around to actually do that, because if not him, then who? This is a blast. I think that everybody should seek it out. And if you can financially support him in any way fathomable, Bandcamp or vinyl, CD, whatever,
There might be
please
copies of
support
this
something like
popping up
this.
on Discogs. Like, we'll see what happens.
Yes,
But there's right now there's a bunch of copies of this album just in a box somewhere not getting sold.
which is such a shame. This is such an interesting record that even if you don't get along with it, I guarantee you, you're never going to hear anything else like it.
I don't know who like decided to pull a bunch of the copies. Maybe it was Sturgill himself, maybe it was
Hmm.
somebody at the label. I don't know. But I hope that we can one day, if there's really something wrong with the album, like
Hmm.
if this is a Life of Pablo situation where it got shipped before it was finished, maybe it's the case, maybe it isn't. But I hope that this album gets a more proper release soon because I'm not going to stop thinking about this through the year. Like, even though it's
No.
niche and even though not a lot of people have been able to access it, this is probably going to be in my end of the year
Hmm.
discussion.
I completely agree. I think that this is something that I was afraid I would be like, oh, it's interesting, and then kind of leave it at that. Because again, you pitch this and it sounds unmarketable. It sounds, I mean, to some people, it probably does sound unlistenable. But Sturgill is simply so confident. He is simply so unafraid to do whatever that he just attacks this with a brazenness that I don't feel like people have. Like, he is kind of a guy who flies by the seat of his pants when it comes to his instincts. It's just that his instincts are really fucking good. They're really muscular. They're really foundational. But he's also a guy who his voice, his songwriting, there is nobody like him. There is nobody willing to do something like this, and I don't think that there's anybody who would do it as well as he is either. And the band behind him on here, they sound exceptional. If this is a Life of Pablo situation, I'm not an expert and I don't know anything about the situation, so it could be. But I mean, my God, the prospect of this album sounding better than it does, I mean, shit, that's hard to fucking fathom. I don't think I've never not enjoyed where he has taken his sound. And this, if anything, proves that Johnny Blue Skies as a project, like, what the hell's the third album gonna sound like? Is he even like 5 albums down the line? Are we even gonna be making country music anymore? A part of me kind of feels like I don't want him to, just because what is he able to evolve this shit into? I feel like there's a part of me that wants him to be like, I feel like if anybody could bring like true blue Skynyrd style southern rock back, I feel like Sturgill could do it and just absolutely nail that shit. But then there's also a part of me that's like, that sounds almost too unambitious for him. I kind of feel like that wouldn't be cutting it quite enough. He would probably try to make it like a prog album too, just because he's a fucking weirdo. But that's the thing. He's a fucking weirdo who is able to still get into the scene and understand what makes artists like Isbell, Stapleton, and all of them. He's able to command an audience like that, but he's also able to take directions that I don't feel like those artists, as much as I love them, are able to take. And I feel like that's worth celebrating, and it's worth celebrating doubly so when the album is so goddamn good. It's so much fun. That's the thing. At the end of the day,
Yeah,
this is just a
that's the big
fun
bullet that I
album.
want to put on this is that this, like with my dance music period of discovery last year, this is just a great funk rock album. Like at
Hmm.
the end of the day, the whole second act of this record is just sex jam on sex jam on sex jam, but each
Hmm.
one of them is so fundamentally different and they escalate to this point of Venus, which is just this
Oh,
rapturous portrait of being
God.
enamored with this figure that by this point in the album is the culmination of so many like what feels like attempts at trying to capture the same sentiment that all get these little particulars correct but doesn't get the grand statement, and Venus feels like the grand statement. And that second leg of the record really grew on me as I was listening to it. Because at first, it is kind of funny that like three tracks in a row, it's like sex jam a slow fade out, sex jam a slow fade out, sex jam a slow fade out. But once you see that it's like a process of development that the album is going on to arrive at the sentiment that Venus is at, or
Hmm.
at least that's how I've been interpreting it as I've been listening
No,
to it, you can really
completely
start
agree.
to appreciate what this album is about and what it's doing. And that serves as a great springboard to Everyone is Welcome when he's able to kind of put that acceptance out into the world and make his artistic vigor an inviting thing for all the people around him, and that be his stated goal, which leads into this declaration of, public solidarity that is, ain't that a bitch?
He's unafraid to be vulgar in the same way that Prince was, but it never dilutes his point. And I feel like, again, it's that level of clarity that makes this so worth admiring. And it's not a part of me too is like once it does kind of go into that second leg of the record, it's almost like I get a really big amount of satisfaction from it because we have modern country music and modern commercial country music trying so desperately to blend itself with things like R&B and hip hop and stuff, and they're like trying to do those like hip hop country slow jams that are like, love making music, and it's always cringe. It always sounds terrible. It's gonna age horrifically poorly in maybe not even 2 years' time. And then Sturgill Simpson comes along, still America's favorite white boy, coming out here and making all these sex jams, and it's like these are unmistakably country R&B fusions, and they sound incredible. This is how everyone should be doing this. He proves that these things aren't just terrible ideas. They're good ideas that are just executed poorly. So, like, if anything, people need to learn from this album if they're gonna keep doing this shit, because I wouldn't mind to hear more music that sounds like this. It's interesting, it's lively, it's fun. If we had any sense, like, this would be an album that should get commercial movement because I mean, I have trouble fathoming people who wouldn't want to dance to at least half of the songs on here. I mean, shit, what's the let's add a little hip hop to this hoedown. You know what I mean?
God. No, I really do think that Sturgill's inspirations from funk are what really separates this from the rest of that. Like, because he's going for a more old-fashioned style of funk than the R&B that the country
Hmm.
radio is chasing right now, where they're going for, I'm thinking about that Morgan Wallen, Tate McRae song. Awful.
Oh.
But it's going for this like 90s R&B powerhouse appeal
Hmm.
that Wallen as a singer just does not have. But
Mm-mm.
Sturgill has the jam band charismatic undersold delivery chops of like 70s funk rock.
Oh, 100%. Like this dude is like this is an album that you make after you listen to, Dirty Mind 1999, but also Maggot Brain, but also like George Clinton, like all that kind of stuff. Like you can hear that in here. And if anything, like even if the next album was a repeat of this sound, which I highly doubt just because Sturgill's not really that kind of artist, but if for whatever reason he did, you can take this further. I feel like you can do even more with this. It's a bit too much of
Absolutely.
a risk to repeat, but honestly, I'm just glad that we got like the fact that we got this at all from someone of his stature is mind-blowing. Like this is the kind of galactic collision of genres that you would only get from people who have like 500 ratings for their albums on Rate Your Music, where there's somebody who, makes this stuff in like in their bedroom, to just be like, yeah, I just made this cool like fusion of genres and shit, and then a bunch of people on the internet listen to it and it never gets further than that. And it's a shame because I like a lot of those collisions, but the fact that this is well, should be a major label release. Uh, the
Yeah, this
point is,
should have been a lot bigger than it's gonna end up being, sadly.
seek this out in one way or another. And if anything, like even if you can't directly buy this album, go buy one of his other albums, man. Like he does not miss. He simply hasn't missed. He hasn't approximated missing yet. I would highly recommend that you go and check him out because he is in the if we're doing the modern country big three, Jason, Sturgill, and probably Tyler Childers.
Yeah, I'm down with that.
So big recommend from yours
Absolutely.
truly. This is such a fun, interesting album. You will hear nothing else like it. I had a great time.
All right.
Okay.
If you'd like to support the show, you can join our YouTube membership. But Jams and Tea is also back on all platforms. If you're listening to this on an audio only platform like Spotify or Podbean, we love you and we
Apple
appreciate you.
Music, Amazon, all of these things you can listen to us on now. We are all on those platforms. And I have noticed some people have been downloading them on audio only platforms because you can see that. And thank you very much for listening to us. If you listen on those things, make sure to share it with other people who do, just in case.
Take it away.
And as always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago. Verizon, can you hear me now? Good. Ba boom. Ba beam.